Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Jennifer Strong. I'm a journalist, and I make a bunch of series about things in tech, including the extortion economy, about cyber and ransomware. And I'll let these guys introduce themselves, too.
Hi, Will Farrell from TikTok. I'm responsible for all of our security in the US and our overall data security and vulnerability management programs.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Rice, the CTO and founder at HackerOne. We're a platform of friendly hackers that help technology companies create the feedback loop to increase their resistance to attack over time.
All right, so we're here to talk about transparency. I think we all, in theory, agree this is a good thing, though there's a lot of stress embedded into this, some shame too, right, embedded into this topic. Why don't we start by kind of maybe poking at that, as well as exploring what does transparency mean?
Sure, I can go first. For us, our goal is really to build trust. We're held to an even higher standard at our company, and so we really believe that transparency builds trust. So the vulnerability management program, the partnership that we've done with HackerOne, has been a big component of that. We believe that finding more vulnerabilities, leveraging the power of the crowd, it helps us to ultimately secure the platform and make our better experience for our billion-plus users.
Yeah, Will, you said it with transparency builds trust. I feel like too often we hear the word transparency and we group it into a bucket of woke terminology that we feel like we need to do in order to be relevant, but it really plays a critical role in building trust in our systems. And if you look at other aspects of our world where safety is critical, all of them have core elements of transparency at the heart of it. It was very safe for all of us to fly here because of the NTSB and the airline industry committing to extreme transparency on the smallest of accidents that occur on airplanes. You don't hear about it regularly, but there are thousands of near-miss accidents every year with the airline industry, and extreme transparency into how it happened, how it was detected, how it wasn't detected, what we're going to do about it. And it's critical in ensuring that we all trust that we're going to get to where we want to be safely.
Fair enough. What is radical transparency, though, and how would you prove it?
Radical transparency is in the context of what your customers and the industry expects from you. And the good news is, like, radical transparency in the airline industry is a little bit harder to do because there's a very high bar set for transparency by regulators. But radical transparency for software companies and technology companies or anyone going through digital transformation, the good news is it's a bit of an easier bar to hit. It's scary because not many people are doing it, but it doesn't take extreme levels of transparency to stand out and build trust with your audience and your stakeholders in a way that's pretty meaningful.
Will, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, I think it's, as Alex said, right, I think just calling it radical transparency doesn't necessarily mean it's hard, right? You have to get over some fears and get past the concept of ignorance is bliss. But it's something that when you're prioritizing the safety of your users, when you're thinking about, Alex talked about terminology like collaboration, it means something different when you're talking about transparency. A lot of the issues, especially when we talk about vulnerabilities and security risks, they don't affect one company or one piece of technology. And so being transparent about that, you're actually securing the greater good. If you're keeping that to yourself, you're actually putting more people at risk.
Yeah, and yet I think there is a lot of fear around this topic. I think as someone who's interviewed a decent number of folks after they've been hacked or had another incident, they're a little scared of losing their job, right? Like, how you can't decide in a vacuum how transparent you're going to be. You're going to have to go to your board or somebody and make a decision around some of this. Does that align with what your experience is of this?
I think it's a matter of fear that people have to get past.
Yeah.
Because if you're transparent about what's going on and what people are finding, it means you have to do something about it, right? And that can be scary for a lot of people. But the reality is, being open and transparent about those things can help people find religion about some things that need to be addressed. And so I think it's a critical piece to get past that. There's a story about some generals in the Joint Chiefs of Staff where They started installing intrusion detection systems in military networks, and this one general comes in and says, hey, I don't know about these intrusion detection systems. Ever since we installed them, we're getting hacked all the time. And the reality is they were always getting hacked, they just didn't know about it. And so that's a scary hurdle to get over.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anything you want to add before?
Yeah, I'll talk from a little bit of personal experience about ourselves as a technology partner and security vendor to folks. We try to practice what we preach here, and one of the example practices we've been doing since the beginning is to disclose every vulnerability that we have, low priority, critical, to ones that actually led to incidents with our customer base. We fully disclose all of them. You can read about them on our security page, and our customers ask about them in our vendor assessment processes. We've had about 440 security vulnerabilities disclosed in the 9 years we've been operating as a vendor, which initially shocks a lot of the customers that we work with. They're not used to seeing vendors come forward in those processes and say, well, actually, here's a list of every vulnerability we've had this year, and actually, here's a list of every vulnerability we've had going back almost a decade now. They're not used to seeing that, and there's this initial friction in the process of having a bunch of questions because we're deviating from the norm with that level of disclosure to our customers. But the end result of every one of those conversations is a higher degree of trust in us and in other areas of our practice because we are forthcoming with information that they didn't necessarily ask for or were expecting.
You know, another thing just to add to that, I mean, you raise a good point about metrics and kind of the shock value when those initial metrics come in. And so part of it is if you adopt this mentality, you have to change how you measure this in the sense that a vulnerability equals badness.
Yeah.
You know, as we implemented this program, we shifted from the number of vulnerabilities or the number of findings or the number of reports as a sign of a problem, and instead shifted to what is our time to remediation? How many of these are reoccurring, meaning we thought we fixed it and it's showing up again? So the number of reports isn't necessarily a bad thing when you get into the mentality. It's about what you're doing about those reports and measuring different things so that you can actually show improvement. And so getting away from this concept that just because a report comes in, we're in bad shape.
Sure. Well, even having context for that number when you threw it out, it was like, well, not enough people talk about it to really even know if that's a big number or a little one, or if the number even matters.
One more thing to touch on here while we're on a roll with this topic, I think one of the points of friction that we have in trying to be more transparent in cybersecurity practices is that it is out of the norm to do it.
Yeah.
One of the things you're going to struggle with as you start being more transparent with your practices is inquiries from the media, headlines, press coverage over these things. And
Right.
there's a quote from a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist at the New York Times that I just love, where he basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, goes on to say that one of the really frustrating things about the media is that they don't cover things that happen every day. They're all over a crash or an explosion or a fire, but they miss the good continuous improvement that happens every day, essentially saying things that happen every day aren't news. And he has this beautiful rant about it, and he goes on and on, and he's talking about it, and he's talking about his fight to get the media to cover diarrhea mortality in children, which is the top killer of children worldwide. And how many of us have read about a diarrhea article killing children? It's still about 2,500 kids per day die from it, and it's not news because we've normalized it. And I think there's a lesson there in how we talk about cybersecurity issues, is that if we are only disclosing here and there, or things leak out outside of our control, we don't establish the reality that security vulnerabilities happen every day, incidents are prevented every day. Anything that the public hears about is a headline. And I think we have to go about changing that, because we have to be talking about these topics, and if every one of them is a headline, we can't do that constructively.
Yeah, actually, this is something I talk about quite a bit, relatedly, as a person in the media. Nobody calls you when things are just status quo or it goes as normal. We hear about it when things are broken, but if you don't have a baseline for what is normal, it's very hard to put that into context. I want to talk a bit more about collaboration. I think it's important. You hear about it all the time in cyber. We've talked about some of the roadblocks, but it could be helpful for some folks to talk about the opportunities of collaboration and why it matters.
Yeah.
Sure. I think when I think of it in this context, I group collaboration into two buckets. There's collaborating with sharing information, and there's collaboration by inviting people in.
Yeah.
And so one of the things about being transparent, again, that's scary, is you're inviting all these people in, you're inviting all these security researchers and hackers to come in and help find the problems. The benefits to that is, we're in a place where we're pushing out new features and software every week, day, sometimes hourly. You could have a 5,000 person security team and still not find everything. So you're getting the benefit of the public really helping to do those things. So there's a real benefit there. The second is sharing. As I mentioned, a lot of the times when you think about the big vulnerabilities that have come out, they don't affect just one company or one piece of technology. Yeah. And so again, you're treating security not as a competitive advantage, but security is something that actually benefits all, and it's important that we all do our part.
Yeah, I think we really tend to get stuck in our own worlds, thinking about our code base or our product or our technology stack as very unique to us. But in reality, there are so many more shared components and practices than we give it credit for. And so collaboration is another one of those things that when you say it, it has this kind of woke connotation to it, that like you do it to be friendly, but it actually has incredible value to yourself in what you can learn from others. I'd go back to the NTSB airline database from earlier. The airline industry doesn't collaborate on safety issues because they feel good doing it. They collaborate on safety issues because there is something to learn in every other accident that somebody else had. And the exact same thing is true in technology, privacy, safety, cybersecurity. And we are only going to get better by collaborating and learning from the mistakes of others, because anything that happened to somebody else could absolutely happen to you.
Alex, you mentioned oh, sorry, you want to chime in?
Well, there was one more thing, just as Alex was talking, there's also the aspect of talent, right? I think we're all dealing with a shortage of talent.
Oh yeah.
And the concept where you can invite the public in and they get paid to find vulnerabilities, it actually helps create the next generation, and it helps folks pick this as a career, it helps them invest in it, and it helps them doing, instead of just the book learning, real hands-on training that makes them more capable. So we've actually viewed it even as a retention technique to let employees, in past jobs, let employees actually go out and participate in these programs and earn extra income. It actually helps sharpen their skills over time and make them more effective.
That's very cool. I think it also gets back to taking away some of the fear and shame and other things that get sort of tied up in this. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned airlines. Are there other industries that we could learn something from?
Yeah, the automotive industry has like every one of us has received a recall for one of our cars.
Sure.
That process is an exercise in extreme transparency. We as consumers see a small part of it, but the teams responsible for safety and performance and reliability at all of those teams, it becomes collectively improved through the act of that, in this case, regulatorily mandated transparency, but the benefits of it are undeniable.
Interesting. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think, if you look at industries like financial services and automotive, you also see this concept of ISACs, their information sharing, where they're sharing the issues they're running into and the vulnerabilities. And part of the reason why that exists, again, it's not for a competitive advantage, but an attack on one is kind of an attack on all. If a vehicle is to get hacked, it has an effect on the entire automotive industry, not just the one company that got hacked. Yeah. Similarly, in financial services, all these systems are connected. And so if you look at those industries as an example, and there's others also that have ISACs, like the health industry, it's worked out well for them, and it's ultimately made them all more secure.
So where do you think you are actually as a field with this, in this case, like in terms of radical transparency or collaboration? Like if you were to give yourself a score, kind of compared to where you were 3 or 4 years ago, where you are now.
Oh, I'm glad you qualified that with the 3 or 4 years ago. 3 to 4 years ago, I think I could give us a moderately passing score. Let's call it a 3 or a 4, relative to where we need to be. We're barely getting started. Yeah. Well, let's call it a 1 or a 0 on where the industry needs to get to. Like the pace of attacks and breaches and just privacy or trust or safety, egregious failures that we have as an industry is not acceptable for where technology needs to get to. And if you put that in context of the other safety critical infrastructure areas, we have a lot of work to do in the technology field.
So 3 or 4 years ago, I wasn't at TikTok, but I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I think we've made some great strides. We're held to a higher standard, and there's a lot of scrutiny that we get. But the HackerOne bug bounty program started about 2 years ago when I first got there. We're now kind of expanding this concept of radical transparency into other areas. So we're also opening up APIs to security researchers to test out how our content moderation works and how videos kind of get popular or get taken down, and how we kind of implemented our community guidelines. So we went from vulnerability management and that piece. The next step is really into how we handle content.
Fascinating. I'm curious, through the course of your work, if there's been something that surprised you that kind of jumps out, maybe could be instructive for folks out there.
Ooh, it's a tough question to dive into, because there's surprises every week in breaches and in incidents that we have. I think I'd love to wake up a week and not be surprised by another big hit. I should probably stop being surprised at this point by them. I think the areas that are most surprising, or maybe I'll reframe the question a little bit as the most frustrating, are the incidents and breaches that you look at and you dig into and you're really like, this could have and should have been prevented. This should have not happened if only we were talking about it in a more open way and sharing best practices and actually implementing those best practices in a way that were good. And so I'd love to stop being surprised by the repeat mistakes that you see across everyone out there.
Fair.
When you're in security, surprise kind of becomes a steady state. But I'm with Alex. I'm looking forward to those days. But, for me, specific to my current role, it's really been speed. So before this, I was a consultant for about 16 years supporting governments around the world and corporate companies. At TikTok, I've been really impressed by our ability to move quickly and roll out fixes and changes in hours in many cases. And again, I think that is due in part to this concept of radical transparency, because once you've put that out there, you're kind of forced to do something about it. We had a recent report actually we got from Microsoft researchers about an ability to do account takeovers. It really helped the engineering teams find religion about an issue that we had. We got it fixed, rolled out, and then we're able to jointly talk about it with Microsoft about what they found and how we quickly remediated it. So it's shifted quickly.
Very cool. If somebody out there is thinking about making this move towards transparency, what's the advice you would have for them right now?
I think my first piece of advice would be ready. So I think it's great to create that sense of, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about this. Make sure you've got at least a rough plan in place, because that intake process and then who you go to and how you handle it and what your SLAs are for different classes of vulnerabilities. If you don't have that in place, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. It doesn't take a long time. It's not that hard. But think through the steps of what you're going to do when you start to get those reports in.
A very similar answer is, don't be scared by the terms radical and extreme that we're talking about here. It really is relative to the industry. Start small, and I think that means a little bit different in everyone's context. So just a few examples of starting small with transparency. If you're a software vendor and you're under regular scrutiny from your customers or your users, try being forthcoming about a issue that you had recently and see how it works. Try to tie it into a narrative of, you should continue to use our software, you should continue to partner with us because we believe in sharing more with you than what you're used to. And try to find some allies across the business that buy into that narrative also. And I think you'll be surprised how receptive your product and business teams are to using that transparency as a differentiator for it. The second example, I'll give a little bit of a plug for how we work at HackerOne, but we start everybody off in a very private program with just a very small number of hand-selected hackers to work with on a disclosure basis, which really helps you get a sense for what it feels like to receive this type of input from the outside and to live up to your commitments to respond quickly to that type of feedback as you receive it.
I'm curious, are there any particular trends right now that you're watching that you think you'll still be watching in a few years that you might want to share with folks? No, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm just like listening to
No,
you thinking.
I love it, and I'm sorry I have a bit of a depressing answer for it, but I feel like every time there's a new push into a new area, we end up relearning a lot of the same lessons over and over again on what is essential security practices, what are essential trust and safety practices, what are the things that users and consumers just need for technology to function properly. The examples that come to mind are some of the mistakes that we're making early on in the metaverse, a lot of the very positive security primitives added in the Web3 world, and then some just complete misses on what's necessary to tackle kind of basic abuse and security
Can you
cases.
unpack those too, just in case not everybody is following closely the metaverse?
So for example, on Web3, you have incredible security around integrity of data transactions, transparency into those data transactions, and now they're all starting to realize what happens when you don't have the ability to correct a mistake, to undo a transaction, to have the appropriate level of signing controls around a particular transaction. Most of the major breaches that we've seen in Web3 have not been because of core Web3 technology, they've been because of missing fundamentals on that we already know how to solve.
I think there is some trends also. One of the biggest things we're dealing with is around this concept of data sovereignty and data localization, right? Where you're a global company and you need to find ways to really localize that data and localize access. And so I think in the context of, as you think about radical transparency and vulnerability management, making sure that as you separate those pieces, you're not creating silos. And if you're not being transparent, even within your company between those pieces, it leaves you open to more risk. So really making sure that even internally, you've got the collaboration and sharing mechanisms in place as data sovereignty becomes more of a thing.
All right, I could ask you guys questions all day, but we're in our final minute, so.
Lightning round?
Well, hey, it could be fun, right? What's something we've not covered yet that you feel is really important we talk about?
Oh, I would love to see these topics that we're talking about transition back into core quality metrics across software and technology teams. I think we've been too long of an industry of kicking cybersecurity over the fence to a security team to tackle, and it's just not going to work. We need development teams and engineering teams being responsible and feeling responsible for security and design as core reasons to use the technology and use the product. And I think it's going in that direction now.
Yeah.
And we need to keep that momentum going.
Yeah, I think the two pieces are, as Alex said, how this feeds back into the security by design process to make sure that those things don't keep happening is one area that's got to be a critical component of any program. The other piece would really be around how this affects your talent and the population that you need, right? I think being a security professional, a lot of times you get accused of security for security's sake, and if you're successful, nothing happens. Yeah. So again, I think this concept around transparency can help you identify the things that actually matter. I'm always a fan of use offense as a way to find the weak points, use red teaming, use good security researchers, because that's the low-hanging fruit, and that's the stuff that will either get you killed or save you. And so I think this is yet another program that can help you prove to the business the value that you're bringing, instead of like, oh, the security guy said it's a best practice, so we just have to do it.
Yeah. That is all the time we have. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
All right.